Hello and welcome. My name is Thaddeus Lawrence, and welcome to another episode on our podcast here. Today, we're going to be talking about burnout. Burnout. And for those of you who are friends, families, and lifelong learners, welcome back to you, back to us again. And if you're brand new, good to have you join us. We're going to be looking today at burnout. It's amazing the number of people in their lives who have experienced some form of a burnout, and when you've experienced that kind of burnout where all of your body is affected, impacted. You fall ill. There's no energy for you to get out of bed. You feel it's kind of the equivalent of crossing the finish line in a very intense ultra marathon. And the problem with burnouts is that once you get a burnout, it's a little bit like quite chronic disease. It takes a great deal of time, takes a great deal of effort, takes a great deal of energy just to pull yourself back into whole again for yourself. And I want to say this about burnout is, and this came in the form of a coachee whom I was working with, or I still am working with at this time of recording, and she works in the financial industry, and highly successful lady, and she had turned up for one of our sessions, complaining of a headache and a spate of nightmares that she'd been having, and just an extreme tiredness. And this is a lady who had experienced a burnout in her life previously, a couple of years ago, where the subsequent three to 4 months was just lost, trying to recover and get herself back up from that burnout. And so when she came complaining about what was going on for her right now, one of the things that we returned to immediately, and we had done some previous work in terms of that self-management, that self-care, and how she was managing her energies, her physical, emotional, mental, intellectual, social, and spiritual energies. And we created and designed very specific exercises and practices for her to put into her life as a ritual in her days. And so when I asked her, I said, which of those rituals are you still engaged in, or how are we doing on those rituals? Her answer was, oh, I stopped doing those a while ago. I said, what do you mean? She goes, yeah, a couple of months ago, I stopped doing those because as I got busier at work, I thought, well, there's so much for me to do. I don't have the luxury of self-care. And I stopped her dead in her tracks there. And I said, now you see where this problem has arisen. It's not necessarily from what you've done or what you haven't done. It's from how you see. In other words, how you think. I say, you are seeing self-care as a luxury. And the moment you see self-care as a luxury, when things got busy for you, you put aside that luxury, which is a common tendency for people to do. And now you found yourself getting into trouble, and you are now advancing a possible burnout for yourself. And I said, I'm going to have you consider a different way of looking into self-care that is not so much a luxury as it is a necessity. It is the necessity of self-care when you engage in it that actually staves off the burnout. Whereas the moment you see it as a luxury, you don't do it anymore, and then burnout is going to show its ugly face in front of you. And by the time burnout shows its ugly face in front of you, it's a bit too late to push it out of the way. So the first thing that here is, I'd like you to take a look into how you see self-care in your life, how you see that self-management, those rituals that you put into life to enhance your multitude of sources. The way that you see it or the way that you think about it is going to tell us what are the actions you're going to be taking around it or not. And it's quite easy for us to anticipate, to forecast burnout way before it comes. So if you've suffered from a burnout, or if you feel that you're perhaps at the onset of burnout, it'd be quite worth your while to actually stop and take a look, and to take a look into what's your relationship with self-care right now. Because by the time that it hits, and this is what happened to a different client of mine, who is a Belgian man who lives in France, highly successful, as is his wife, who was the general manager of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. She had, something like 7,000 people beneath her, and she had all her life risen to a top, just being a go 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 kind of person, very powerful lady, very much a high achiever. And one recent holiday just last summer that they had, she told herself, she said, "Okay, great, I'm just gonna switch off and to be completely off for these 2 weeks." And what happened after that was her body just shut down. Her body just shut down, and that for the first time was when she was attuned to the fact that burnout was at her doorstep. Why? Because all this time she had just been running on adrenaline, pushing her body beyond its limits without any kind of a rest, without any kind. It's a little bit like fishing, right? If you keep pulling on a fishing rod without letting it go, you're gonna tire yourself out. Fishing because it required to pull and then to let it go, pull and then to let it go, pull and then to let it go. And she had never let it go before in her entire working life. And she was just like pull, pull, pull. Or in her case, it was really push, push, push. And the moment she went on this 2 week holiday, the body just went, you know what? I've had enough. I'm done. And that brought on an early retirement for her. And now she's no longer working and taking a great deal of time off to nurture her bruised and battered body and her intellectual rind. It's kind of like running a marathon. If you ever run a long distance race before, a race that's longer than you've ever run before, you will notice the moment you cross the finish line, that the body in a way begins to shut down. You begin to feel the hurts, you begin to feel the pains in an amplified version. Everything, all the hurts and the pains and the aches just seem to be magnified. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing insofar as you now allow yourself to actually notice your body versus blindly, automatically pushing yourself through and running on adrenaline. And there is a limit, a finite limit to your ability to run on adrenaline. So if you're suffering from burnout right now, if you're experiencing some onset, the signs of burnout are not bad because now you get to stop and to have a look. A wonderful book that I recommend everyone to read here is by a man called Paul Kalaniti. And he wrote the book When Breath Becomes Air. And it's a story, his own personal story of being a neurosurgeon who ultimately contracted cancer and then passed on. In fact, the final chapter of his book was written by his wife. And in that, he said this, he said, we're all aware of two things in our life. The first thing we're all aware of is that we're all going to die. The second thing that we're all aware of is that we don't know when we're going to die. And he said when he got cancer and when that prognosis was spelled out in front of him, and he took a moment to stop and pause for it to sink in, to realize. And over the course of his cancer, he realized two things. One is that he's still going to die, and two, that he still doesn't know when he's going to die. You see, those two facts stayed the same. However, he said this, he said he realized now he understood those two things acutely. He understood those two things acutely. It wasn't just some idea anymore. It wasn't just some concept anymore. It wasn't just some intellectual, philosophical musing anymore. He understood those acutely in his life right now. And the rest of his days, as he wrote and he described in his book, was days filled with love, filled with beauty. So if you're in a place right now, whatever you are in a place right now, I'd like you to just pause for a moment and understand acutely where your body might be, where your mind might be right now in this path uh, of work, of life, and where burnout might come into play there. And if you can understand this acutely, that if you don't engage in that self care, then that is an invitation for burnout to come because there's only so much that your adrenaline and your drive can take you. However, if you understand acutely that self care is the necessity for you to keep going further and further and for you to keep accomplishing more and more, then I think you're in for a highly satisfying and a fulfilling life, one that you can actually stop and savor the fruits of your labor to really celebrate the joys and the wins in your life. So, with that, whichever time that you're listening to this right now, whether it's the start of the year or the middle of the year, the end of the year, it's always worth to stop and take a look and to ask yourself, what are you understanding about your life acutely right now? So, from me to you, I hope this has been a wonderful moment that allowed you to just pause and have a listen inward for you to take a look. And all the best, acutely, for you. And may you have a wonderful life ahead. And I'll see you in our next episode. Take care and be well.